Welcome to a new episode of Outside the Panel with your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Outside the Panels. I am your host as always, Johnny the Machine Hughes, and joining me this time around is writer, creator of Mad Cave's newest hit Western comic. Okay, that covers it up. It's Mr. David Galiano. David, how's it going?
It's going good. Nice to meet you.
And you too. Thank you very much for taking the time out. I've had a chance to look over the book. The review's up on the website. So people can go and check that out. Let's start right at the top and work our way down. So, what was it about comics that made you think, you know what, I want to get part of this mad creative world?
Well, I've been a big fan of comic books my whole life. I actually wanted to be an artist at one point in time, but I came from a very practical family. So they were like, get a real job, go out in the world and actually do something that you'll get paid for. So I spent a good portion of my life doing that. And then I started to fall in love with the writers, I should say, like Jeff Johns and such. And I was like, oh, wow, there's an actual story behind this beautiful artwork. Let me look more into that. And shortly thereafter, I was like, okay, you know what? I want to try this myself. I want to try to actually write a story that I would like to read.
Okay, cool, excellent. So Jeff Johns was an inspiration for you then?
Oh yeah, I mean that's just one of many, but that's the first one that comes to mind. When I got back into comic books in the early 2000s, my local comic book shop owner was like, hey, you know, I know that the X-Men's been very dour lately. I know that you're not really into that. So let me hook you up with the Flash. And I laughed at him. I was like, the Flash? Who the hell wants to read the Flash?
Isn't he dead already?
Exactly. Like I don't. Who wants to read the guy that just goes fast? But I picked up Jeff Johns' The Flash with Wally West, and let me tell you, I was hooked, absolutely hooked. I was like, wow, like he's really made this character worth reading. And that's another reason I wanted to write, because I was like, I want to do that. I want to make characters that are really worth reading, you know?
Okay, totally. So I think Wally West is probably the first sidekick to really kind of make his own identity. I know people are going to shout at me and say, no, Nightwing did it. Yeah. Nightwing's got Batman issues. Let's just leave it at that. But I think Wally West is the first one to kind of outstrip his mentor, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Crisis, but you know, so it's a good shout. So you said get back into comics. I take it you were into comics before the 2000s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was big into comic books all the way up until like the mid 90s. About the time that the bottom was kind of falling out, and people were more focused on the image of comic books, you know, quote unquote image comic books themselves, and not so much creating good stories. In my opinion, that's my personal opinion. So I kind of fell out of love with comic books at that point in time. I didn't know that it was because the writers and the artists had separated. I just knew that there was a vibe about the comic books I didn't like, you know?
Yeah, totally. You know what? I hear it so often. I mean, I myself was a comic book fan from about, as a kid and growing up in the 70s. I then started collecting properly back mid 80s. And I think similar to you, the whole image explosion kind of left me a little bit bereft of like, really? And I kind of fell out of love with it. It wasn't until just walking in, actually, again, not too dissimilar, around 2010, I think, something crazy like that. Popped in, was like, hey, who's this blonde girl wearing a Batgirl costume? What's that all about? You know, and hence, you know, I got back into comic books. So I blame it on Stephanie Brown. So there you go. Damn you, Steph. Hey, I love Steph. She's my fave. All right, cool. So Jeff Johns was one. So what were you reading back in the day then? Back before the bottom fell out. X-Men, I take it by the preview.
Of course, yeah. Chris Claremont all the way, of course. I was reading a lot of Spider-Man because Todd McFarlane's art really caught my eye, and I really liked I really liked that art style. A lot of it was again, I was a dumb kid, so a lot of it was just based on the actual art itself and not the
Uh-huh.
story. So anything that Jim Lee did, anything that Rob Liefeld did, anything that McFarlane did, I was reading like I couldn't get enough of it.
Okay.
Of course, until the whole Image dropout thing. But
Yeah.
before that, when they had Jim Lee on X-Men, and they had Todd McFarlane on Spider-Man, and they had Rob Liefeld on like New Mutants and then X-Force, I was hooked into all of that. I wasn't reading a lot of DC because at the time I thought DC was just absolutely terrible. Now I completely regret that because there were some fantastic stories going on at the time. But you
Well,
know,
when I look back at that period of time, I think you're absolutely right. I think Marvel definitely had the edge for cutting edge art because you had Jim Lee's clean lines, you had the cartoony style of McFarlane,
mhm.
who proper took on board Spider-Man as a kind of like insect type thing, and of course Liefeld, love him or hate him, but he was very
all the pouches
over the
all the
top. It
pouches
was
you could handle.
Yeah, yeah, and then some. So yeah, it was very over the top. When you compare that to guys like Jim Aparo and Dan Jurgens, who
Mhm.
I love Jim Aparo. He's my Batman artist forever. You look back, and probably the only guy that DC had back then that was kind of breaking the mold a little bit was Norm Brayfogle, who was doing the very sort of like elongated action dynamic style of Batman. So I totally can see where there's a disconnect between the two. So it's totally fine. Totally fine. I mean, hey, everybody loves different comics. It's cool. That's why
And
there's so many other damn things.
like I said, I was more focused on art back then. I
Yeah,
really wanted to
definitely.
be an artist, so.
So have you drawn something then for your comic book? Because obviously Savage Bastards #1 is your co-creation. Do you call it co-creation, right? And you're the writer of that book. So do you kind of help with the art, kind of like draw a little sort of like, well, this is what I want to see, and this is, or do you just work on text descriptions?
Just text descriptions. My art has gone way to the wayside, so I would not want to even begin to send any crappy art to Carlos Angeli, the artist, because he does such a good job. I would just be embarrassed. I would just feel absolutely terrible.
Okay, cool. Hey, everyone creates differently. That's fine. That's fine. So tell us about the book, Savage Bastards #1. I kind of It's a western. I've said right at
Mhm.
the top, right at the top. There's some crazy stuff going on. Give us the rundown. Give us the lowdown. What's
All right.
what's the 411?
So, when Mad Cave Studios came to me with the IP of Savage Bastards, they really didn't have much of a story in mind. They just wanted there to be they wanted the focus to be on two brothers, which I focused the story on two brothers. But I took the concept of bastards literally, and so
Oh,
majority of the characters in the story are bastards. They all come from one terrible, horrible father
mm-hmm.
who basically uses and abuses his children in any which way he wants, and that's kind of like the basis of what's going on in the story. You have two brothers, Samuel and Elliot. They are both half brothers, obviously, two different mothers, same father, and they couldn't be different. They couldn't be more different from each other. Like Samuel is very calculating. He's very precise. He's very quick on the draw,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Elliot is more of a kind of laid back character, a character who has spent most of his life basically not really having to deal with any dangerous situations or anything like that. So when the two come together and they start their mission, it's definitely a kind of almost like a buddy cop kind of thing, where
Yeah,
you've kind of got the old haggard
yeah,
police officer and the young newbie kind of learning the trade, as it were.
rookie.
Um, a, a lot of crazy things going on, and a very small, I don't want people to think that there's a big influence of it, but there's a very small fantasy twist to it that kind of unravels as the story goes on.
Okay, so we'll leave that hanging there. So Inspiration wise, I mean, what is it about westerns that are so attractive? Because you've kind of got the old school stuff. Of course, you have. Then more recently, I say more recently, it's not that recent at all, but you've had Cowboy and Aliens. You've had Wild Wild West. You've got Westworld, which is no matter how you want to define it as a sci-fi show, it is pretty much 80% cowboy, 20% sci-fi. So, so what is it about the western then as a genre that you think keeps people coming back?
I think it's a few things. I think it's the grittiness of it, first off, and the lawlessness of it. Like there are sheriffs and things like that, but there aren't very many of them. So a lot of horrible things can happen in these stories. There's also a lot of adventure aspects because there's a lot of the unknown in the West. It hasn't all been discovered. It hasn't all been plotted. There's certain areas that as a cowboy per se you couldn't go to because it was Indian territory and things like that. So there's so many aspects of it that kind of like ignite that sense of adventure with that sense of danger. I mean, it's kind of like the old pirate movies and things from back in the day. They had that sense of lawlessness and kind of grittiness and adventure. It's America's version of that, really.
Okay, I can totally get that. What's your favorite cowboy then? Who's your guy?
I mean, I grew up on Young Guns, so Billy the Kid is my go-to. Emilio Estevez just killed it with that character. That the whole Rough Riders in general, I really liked.
All right, okay. I'm a little bit older than you, so I'm gonna go with the Lone Ranger. Sorry, So what can I say? I'll say this before anybody tries to date me. No, I do not remember watching it when it came out first in black and white. I did watch it in the 70s as reruns. Thank you very much. Just saying. Okay, cool. So the idea, I get it, that the characters are all kind of related through one mean son of a gun, son of an hombre, I suppose. How do you kind of pace that out? Because this is a 5-issue book, right? It's 5-issue series. So, and I get that the brothers are going to be the main characters, but issue 1 kind of introduces a bit of a clan. How do you manage to pace? How do you plan to pace the story out when you've got kind of like a cast of characters that you might want to, you might want to see more of Jane, or you might want to see more of one of the other characters. How do you kind of deal with that?
Well, I try as the book goes along to give. There's a few focuses in the book besides the brothers, and I try to give them their moments, as it were. And they each kind of have a very pivotal role in the story, but because of the cast of characters, because of what's going on, the book is very fast paced. You've got a lot of action adventure going on, and then you've got a couple of smaller moments where you get that time to really get to know the characters a little bit better, but then it's right back into the action.
Which do you find easier to write, the action bit or the quieter parts of the?
Honestly, I prefer to write the quieter parts. I like to try to have a connection with my reader, and unfortunately, I found that was a little difficult with this project because of just minor things. Like, my artist is fantastically talented, but he likes to add a few extra panels here and there, which can cut your dialogue a little bit. But he's so good at portraying emotion that there will be times where I hope the reader can feel what they're meant to feel in those moments. I mean, there's these very small, precious moments that happen later in the series that I really hope people connect to.
So yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the first issue now, and there's the panels where you see Rose, and you can see there's 3 panels at the top of the page. One's where she's like quite idyllic, she's mind her own bee's knees. then where she's alert, and then she turns like super angry. It's like the Hulk going through a transformation. So I totally get what you're saying about that emotion element on there. That's it's really well worked, rather nuanced. I also like later on that page where before she pulls the gun, she like has to undo her cloak, sort of thing. Again, very well observed. So obviously, either you or your artist have been watching tons of cowboy movies.
Well, it's a great collaboration. I mean, I write full script, so those panels I described that I wanted them to look a certain way because I wanted that that emotion because you see Rose in the first couple pages or the first page I should say where she's bought herself a passion fruit I believe and she's cut it open and she's taken a bite and then you've got those 3 panels where it's like she's just enjoying being alive and everything's at peace with the world and then she's starting to come back to okay I'm in a setting now I need to pay attention to my surroundings and then you get that F moment when she realized that she's in danger and that's a great collaboration. Carlos does such a good job with those things and his minor detail work is fantastic. If you look closely at the page you will see things like you have to unclip your strap, you have to like the way that the guns fire because this Carlos really researched the hell out of this book. He actually came back to me and he's like, well, with this kind of gun, it didn't exist in this time period, so we have to change it to this kind of gun, and it'll have this kind of effect when it shoots. I was like, by all means, Carlos, whatever you got to do, man. Like, so Carlos put a lot of research into making it look as authentic as he could.
Good. And you know what? I totally see that. The fact when you look at the credits page, they've got the revolvers at the top over the box. The creators, they are Western. They're cowboy guns. You look at them and you go, yeah, I recognize what they are. So that's cool. So you mentioned Mad Cave approached you regarding this, or So how did that work then? So is this your first book, or have we bypassed a tad of your history somewhat?
No, this is my first published work. Mad Cave Studios actually had a contest, and they were looking for writers and artists, and I was one of those who won that contest. A lot of the books that have come out from Mad Cave recently are from the contest winners, like Over the Ropes with Jay Sandling. Sandlin, sorry, he was one of the contest winners. Show's End with Anthony Cleveland, another one of the contest winners. So these books. Some of these books they've been putting out were from the actual contest winners, and they are some fantastic pieces of work. Like Mad Cave is already putting out some great stuff, but I honestly, and maybe I'm just biased because I'm one of the contest winners and I've become close friends with these guys. But honestly, like they are putting out some really good stuff.
No, I totally agree. I think Mad Cave. I think every now and again, it seems that indie companies make a splash. Yeah. So, for example, a couple of years back, it was Aftershock. Maybe last year it was Vault Comics. Yeah. You've got Mad Cave now. I think the proof in the pudding is how sustainable they become, if that makes sense. Yeah. Because you don't want to be like a kind of like a flash in the pan. I mean, I loved Aftershocks when it first came out. I was like, wow, these books are great, they're fantastic, and and then I'm kind of like, right, okay, so the theme of the idea is to give you a shock, but after the first 2 issues, it's not a shock anymore. It's just kind of part of the story, to kind of lose the model a little bit. The thing I like about Mad Cave is they're so diverse. They don't just settle to one particular genre.
I think that speaks to their sustainability because you're right, they are choosing different genres for each one of their stories, and you're not really seeing any kind of repeats so much that you would see in other companies. They're not doing a whole bunch of horror books or a whole bunch of sci-fi books. It's a very diverse group. They even have a historical fiction, a biblical historical fiction book, the Knights of the Golden Sun, which oh yes, it's absolutely fantastic.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
So the kind of, I guess the vibe I'm getting is that, you know, when you've got like Shaw's End, I read that and that felt very much like American Horror.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially the Carnival season. I read this, and I think I mentioned in the review, it feels Tarantino-esque in places. Is that a fair comparison?
I would say that's pretty fair. My pitch was to do kind of some Tarantino-esque dialogue plots, but again, you know, because of pacing and things like that, you know, I feel like that kind of gets lost in the shuffle. My main goal, what Mad Cave, the only like real mandate that Mad Cave, I'm sorry, gave me, was that they really wanted a lot of the Western tropes to be put in this book. You know,
Oh,
so
okay, cool. Yeah.
so purposely you'll find a lot of the Western tropes in this book, but I put kind of like a little spin on them as far as how they interact with the actual story. But you've got your train heist, you've got your bank robbery, you've got your your shootout, you know, your duel, you've got your bar fight, you've got all these things that are very Western tropes, but at the same time I'm using them to progress a little bit different Western story, you know, and I don't know if people will get that in the first issue, but by that second issue, I think it becomes apparently clear that this is not, you know, just a cut and paste Western action adventure, you know?
Cool, excellent. So, which issue are the Showgirls in? Just so I know.
Actually,
the listeners know I have a thing about fishnet, so you know, if you let me know which issue that is, and I'm there.
it is definitely in the story.
Woo! Bring it on. That's me sold. Put me down for a set. Thank you very much. How is it working with Carlos? Because because the internet's made creating books a lot easier than it used to be. Yeah.
Oh yes.
So people can be in different countries. I mean, hey, look at us. You know, I'm sat in my studio. # really my bedroom. Hey, I'm all right. I'm okay with that. And you're stateside, right? So we can have this conversation. When it comes to creating books, it gets even further because your writer could be in the States, your artist is European, your colorist is a different European, and the letterer, well, you know, he's American or English, and so every time you've got to go, that it has to go through the old tinterweb. So how is working all that out for you? How is creating that comic? How's working with Carlos, first of all?
So Carlos lives in South America, and honestly, we have had personal conversations with each other, especially at the beginning of like what we wanted from the book. But Carlos is the kind of guy that doesn't. I mean, I write in full script, but Carlos is the kind of guy that doesn't need a whole lot of direction. He doesn't need, you know, a whole lot of I don't want to say babysitting, but you know, you don't really need to sit over his shoulder as he works. So
cool.
Basically what happens, I turn my script in, you know, I save the dialogue until I get back the completed panels, because of the fact that, you know, like Carlos will put in, you know, how he thinks the scene should play out, and then, you know, I'll put the dialogue to that, and it's kind of it then becomes kind of like a combination of, let's say, the full script in the Marvel way, you know.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, working with Carlos has been absolutely fantastic. He is such a talented artist. I know I saw a criticism by one reviewer where I don't think they got what he was doing, because the man can do all kinds of different styles of art. The style that he chose for this book is actually a play on the Western cartoonist style.
All right.
So it's supposed to look like, you know, if you were to open up like a newspaper or something in the West, in that time period, and they would draw like a shootout happened, you know, here, or a bank robbery here, and they would draw those pictures instead of having like the actual photographs, because, you know, photography was first off newer and very hard to come by. They had a lot of artist representations of what happened, and that's kind of the style that he went with the book, and it fits perfectly. You know, I saw a criticism about the art, and I don't think they got what he was doing with that that old timey style. You know.
Cool, excellent, great point to make. Great point. I guess the art has to tell the story. It's storytelling, right? So I think if the story's told, then the style can kind of, I'm not going to say be ignored. That's the wrong word I'm going to say. What's the word I'm going? The style can be kind of be, what's the word? Enhanced, I guess, because the storytelling's so good. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So we talked about art earlier. So you look at a Todd McFarlane Spider-Man, and he's all elbows and angles and all that sort of stuff. It's great, like an insect, right? But that's not to say somebody who's more straight edge, like say Sal Buscema or John Romita, the senior. That's not to say that their art sucked in comparison to McFarlane. It's just different style, but the storytelling is the key point, which I think is kind of you alluded to earlier as well. So yeah, that's a fair point. Fair comments. Definitely, I think people listening to the pod should take that into consideration when they look at the book, because you're trying to create a whole vibe of a story, not just like 5 issues. So yeah, good shout, good call, well done. On that note, we will take a quick break so we can hear more messages from some of the sister podcasts that you can get on the UCPN.
Beyond the world of DC and Marvel, there is a world that opens the imagination in ways that you've never known. The world of indie comics is here, with comic books that you didn't even know existed. Thanks to Dodgy, Al Mega, and the random dude Josh, you too will have your eyes open to new books in the indie comic universe. Check out Flipside Focus, only on the Undercover Capes Podcast Network.
Excellent. Thanks for those words. Don't forget to check out the UCPN for all your favorite shows. All right. There'll be a promo at the end of the pod, so listen out for the names because you want to go to check them out. All right. So we're back with David talking about Savage Bastards, talking about Mad Cave, and we've just got through talking a little bit about the art style of the book to fit the Western theme there. That was great comments all the way through. So I would say that coloring is kind of one of the things that has really improved over the last, 20 years, maybe
Absolutely.
even quicker. You know what I mean? It's funny because I get what you say about like the grittiness of Westerns and stuff. Do you sometimes look at digital coloring now and think, man, I just wish we could just make it just a little bit more grimier?
Oh wow, that's a tough one. It depends on the project.
Yeah.
Carlos, the artist, actually does the coloring for this book as well, and I
Cool.
really feel like he has a masterful understanding of the whole color palette and how it plays out in the story.
Totally.
There's one scene in particular which I don't want to give too much away, but it basically ends with a character like raising a gun above his head and declaring something, and in the sky behind him is this like beautiful cloudy light blue sky, and it looks so realistic, especially against the more cartoonish style of the more Western cartoon style of the characters, that it's really it just pops. So and the parts where there is a lot of grit, I mean, I feel like he does a really good job of portraying that. Like when the characters are down in the dirt or they've been knocked over, you see the dust kick up, you see their clothes are a little dirty.
The hoof prints in the sand.
Oh yeah.
You can see the hoof prints when you see the guys go by. That's cool. Okay, cool. So you've got Western, you've got Tarantino-esque elements in there. You've got some of the Western tropes, the things that people like about Westerns in there. And then you have to go and throw in a little bit of fantasy.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Because I can't tell a straightforward tale.
So, do not give the game away, of course. But how how difficult was it to entwine that fantasy element going into the story?
I will be perfectly honest with you. It was pretty much the next thought after the characters all being, all the main characters or the bad guys, or whatever the case would be, all being related. It was pretty much the next spot. Like, why does this guy matter? Why does their father matter? Like, what does he have that makes it so makes him such a pivotal part of the story, and makes these characters, these bastards of his, so act in the way that they do. So it was pretty much the next logical step for me in the story process. When I was creating the story, I was like, oh, okay, let me add this element, and this is something that that they all strive for, they all want, basically. Well, not all of them, but the more savage of the savage bastards, as it were.
Do you have a favorite character out amongst the different?
I have a few.
Spoken. Do you know what that is? That's the commitment of a writer. See, a writer is kind of like, well, if someone turns around and says, I really like this character, that basically means nothing's going to happen to him or her.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
now, if someone says that I've got a few, it kind of means, well, I really like this one, but I might be doing something really bad to them, so I'm not going to get too invested. But this other one, you're like, oh, okay, what's going on? All right, cool. It's a good answer.
I will say that my standout characters for me, the ones that I really enjoy, of course, I like the two main characters a lot. But and this isn't really a spoiler. You get to know this relatively early on. But one of the characters' mother is named Rose, and she's the one that we were talking about earlier. She's one of my absolute favorite characters. And you see, I mean, you've read the first book, so you see what happens to her. So that kind of shows you what I do with the characters I really like.
Whoa! Don't get on your wrong side. That's all I'm saying.
And then my another one of my favorite characters, because I'm a big fan of villains. I was a huge fan of Vader when I was a kid, things like that.
Whoa! How can you be Vader is the worst. He never accomplishes anything.
I know
Vader,
he doesn't.
Protect the Death Star. Oops. Vader, stop the plans. Oops.
See, as an adult now, I can actually relate more to Vader, because it's like, David, go complete this project. Oops.
Put the garbage out. Oops.
It's like, oops. Pay your light bill. Oops. So I definitely I can see where he's coming from. He's got a lot on his plate, and he gets a little overwhelmed sometimes. That's why he's always so angry. It makes sense.
Yeah, his to-do list is through the roof.
He's got these kids that he doesn't see. That weighs on him. Sure, there's probably a lawyer involved somewhere with some kind of custody dispute. It's a lot for him. So
yeah. Wonder he's breathing heavy.
But another one of my favorites is the Spider. So the Spider is this character who wants to be like a true British gentleman. He really wishes that he was that way. And obviously he's born in the West, in America. So he's got this very pompousness about him. Not saying that British people are pompous, so no offense.
Whoa. I'll let you off with that.
I'm saying the character himself, though, he's very pompous. He's very self-assured in many ways, and he just comes off as this big douchebag. And sometimes it's just fun to write a douchebag.
Yeah, totally. I think going back to the Western trope, having somebody from like a British character in there, it just serves to add contrast, doesn't it? More than anything. So it's fine. Mm-hmm. That's fine. I'll take the lumps for my country. It's all right. Cool. What is it, do you think, about the Westerns then that lend themselves to crossover? So you've put a bit of a fantasy element into Savage. We talked. I mentioned earlier things like Wild Wild West, which is the West and science fiction. We talked like Cowboys and Aliens, which is, Cowboys meets Ben 10.
Yeah, exactly.
Before Ben 10 was around, probably. People are going, Ben 10, is that still on? I don't know. It's been a while. I haven't watched Cartoon Network in years. No.
I mean, you could say The Mandalorian and or The Witcher are kind of westerns, you know?
Do you know what? Funny enough, you should say that. That is the very first thing I turned around when I watched the first episode of The Mandalorian. I turned to my wife and was like, this is cowboys in space. This is what this is, you know. And then I think probably I haven't seen all the season yet, so I'm a couple of episodes back. But the weakest one so far for me is the one where he goes on the planet and has to protect the village from the ATST.
Oh yeah.
And that is probably my least favorite Western trope, the protect the homestead type of story. I'm like, oh, but it got better after that again, so don't mind. But yeah, totally, and yeah, I can see it with Witcher as well. Witcher's he's a Pale Rider type of Western, where he's just going around doing his thing, not getting involved. You know,
yeah,
obviously with less clothes, you know, for some.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, my fiance appreciates that like you wouldn't believe. Like
yeah. My wife says the same thing about Thor. She goes, yeah. I like Thor movies, really. And I challenge her, say his hammer. Call. Tell me the name of his hammer, and then fine, I'll take it that you like Thor. Whatever.
But I think especially right now the reason that the westerns are kind of lending themselves to other genres is, again, you know, it's westerns are not black and white a lot of times. You know, you've got your character who is usually you've got like one main character who may be kind of good, maybe kind of bad, or maybe he just does bad things for good reasons. You've got again, like I said before, you got the lawlessness of it. You know, there's you know, in like the Mandalorian, I mean, there's the lawlessness of space. There's plenty of planets that don't have like real, you know, police and things like that. So there's, you know, plenty of opportunities for scumbags to take advantage and for, you know, quote unquote good guys or white hats to go in and kind of, you know, rescue the town, as it were, like in the Mandalorian, you know.
Definitely.
I think it really comes down to it's that lawlessness of it, the grit of it, and the grayness of it, where, you know, you have this character who may be a bad guy. I mean, you know, the Mandalorian is a bounty hunter. You know, he's not necessarily a great guy per se, but they do these things that make you go, oh, well, he's a good guy, you know. But then the next minute they might do something where it's not. So the whole iffiness of it too. It's I think it's just a fascinating idea, the whole Western concept, and, you know, games like Red Dead Redemption are taking huge advantage of that, getting people really hooked into that moral ambiguity, as it were, and it really can lead to some very interesting stories that you can't tell in, like, say, a straight superhero story, or like sometimes in a horror story. But, you know, you can't really, like a lot of the other genres, if you don't give it that kind of Western touch up, you can't really tell the same kind of story, if that makes any sense at all, you know.
Totally. It's funny how we're sort of using Star Wars as our analogy, because everybody knows that Star Wars is based on the Seven Samurai, but take it the next step. Surely Star Wars, the very first one, A New Hope, surely it's just the Magnificent Seven.
It's exactly what it is. And the Magnificent Seven is a ripoff of the Seven Samurai. So it's, you know,
it's the same style. I mean, you talk about ambiguity, which is the idea that these characters are potentially morally compromised, but sometimes do the right thing. Han Solo by himself is a smuggler.
Oh, he's a straight cowboy. He is a straight up cowboy. Like, he even has his blaster hung low. Like, the way that he walks and carries himself, he is straight. I mean, you put a cowboy hat on him, you can put him in a John Wayne flick tomorrow. You know,
and he always shoots first.
Exactly. Thank you. Damn you, Lucas.
Yeah, that's like going a little bit. It's so funny when he turns around and said in the press release, Han Solo's a good guy, so therefore he won't shoot first. He's smuggling spice. He's smuggling drugs For a
He's a
crime
drug
lord.
smuggler.
How good a guy is this? You know, it's like I've seen enough episodes of Miami Vice. There's no good drug smugglers around.
Well, and we're not 100% the spices actual drugs. I mean, what if it is just like spices, like salt and pepper and things like that, and like some cumin and stuff? Like maybe there's just a really bad tariff because of the empire on actual spices, so all the food in the galaxy is bland, and you know, he's doing his service to help out, you know, the poor man just trying to have, you know, his blue milk and cereal, you know.
With a pinch of tarragon.
With a you know, maybe a little thyme and rosemary and sage. You don't know how they get down in the deserts of Tatooine.
I don't think I want to know. Pesky womp rats.
That's right.
Okay, cool. So here's a question I kind of ask, and I've kind of changed it over the last couple of times I've gone around this. If you were given the opportunity to work on one of the big two characters, not to say that indie comics are bad, because I love indie comics. I think there's more variety. You get a different type of story. You get different type of storytelling, different types of writing. You get to play around with the art, you know, so it's not always have to fit within the projected, this person has to look like this all the time, right? So this isn't me saying one's better than the other. But if you were given the opportunity to work on a big two character, who would it be and why?
Oh, I've got this planned. I'm hoping somebody from DC is listening right now. So, I would love to do like a mini series on Catman, you know, and have kind of a Catman Batman team up situation where, you know, they have to solve some kind of crime together. And I don't know if you kept up on Catman when the great Gail Simone took him over and made him part of the Secret Six and things like that. But he went from being a joke, you know, to being a real badass character, you know. And I would just love to see him hanging out with Batman, who, you know, was his first arch nemesis, who he fought to a standstill back in the whatever it was 60s or whatever. I would love to see them just riffing on each other. Well, obviously Batman wouldn't be riffing, but Catman would be riffing on him, you know, in their like in the Batmobile on their way to like the next clue for the crime scene. Like, you know, Catman, you know, talking about, you know, how Batman, you know, has too many children sidekicks and how that kind of bothers him a little bit and it makes him a little uncomfortable, and you know, Batman basically saying something to the effect of, and this is coming from a man who dresses like a giant cat, you know, and then Catman of course turning back to him and be like, well, this is coming from a man who dresses like a giant bat, so
who sleeps with the cat.
Exactly. So what came first, the chicken or the spandex, you know?
Yeah, I've even got the title for you. There you go. Chapter 1, Catmandu.
Oh, there you go. Catmandu. I like it. Yeah, I would just like to do like some small character arcs, you know, just expanding on the more like C-list and D-list characters out there, because that's I've loved again, I told you that Jeff Johns kind of, you know, hooked me back into reading comic books, and then the whole, you know, he's the one that turned me on to writers in the first place, and then I met like, you know, I then went to like Gail Simone and you know, even other writers who I'd read before, but I went back and read them with a different eye, like Alan Moore and things like that. You know, you see that they take some of these characters that are, you know, real minor players when you get down to it, you know, and they give them such personality and such memorable roles. It's amazing. Like looking at Alan Moore, if you look at The Watchmen, I mean, Rorschach is Walmart brand Batman, really. And he does not have any real special abilities. You know, he's just a guy who doesn't have any money, you know, trying to fight crime, but yet he stands up in the end of that book. He stands up to a god. You know,
totally. He's very much like the Question.
Exactly. Oh, I love the Question. Absolutely like the Question. That's a very good comparison. Yeah. I like that. I like when a writer takes a smaller character and expands their role in the greater mythos of you know, either DC or Marvel.
Yeah, totally. I think you make some valid points, because if I'm not up to my back teeth of Joker stories, and I think to myself, you know, Joker isn't even on my top 5 Batman villain list.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people go, "What, really? He did this, he did that." I'm like, yeah, I get it. Yeah, he killed Robin. Yeah,
Well, like
killed Gordon's wife, crippled, Barbara. But the thing for me is, it's like there's more intense, there's more cleverer, more characters you can do better things with. Like Two-Face or a really good Ra's al Ghul story, which we haven't seen for years.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got these characters, and you think, and it's funny you mentioned Gail Simone, because Birds of Prey was due to get cancelled.
Yeah.
Was going to get cancelled before she took it over with Ed Baines, and turned it into pretty much Charlie's Angels.
The masterpiece that it was. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it was
like Gail Simone. Gail Simone is one of those writers who just, she gets it. She absolutely gets it. She's got great dialogue. She has great personal interactions with the characters, and that's what really, when you get past everybody punching each other and blowing stuff up, like, what do you have?
Yeah.
You've got to have good dialogue. You've got to have, good interpersonal conflict and a little bit of drama. And if you don't have that, the story kind of falls flat. And not to go and harp back on Image's early days, but that's kind of the issue that we were having with Image in the early days.
True.
Like Young Blood, for instance, was just a bunch of guys punching each other and stuff blowing up. There wasn't any substance, so it didn't really resonate with people. And people loved all the art, so they bought the hell out of it at first, but then it just dropped off, and they did like 3 or 4 times where they tried to get it going again, and it just was not working. But then like a book like Max, the Max had a fantastic storyline, so it went for a while and had a very strict following. So, it may not have been like selling like hotcakes, like say Spawn, which had kind of a good story, but had great art. Eventually became a better story when Todd kind of backed off and let somebody else come in and write.
Yeah,
but
totally. I was just thinking that. I was thinking Spawn's the big success, but it only became a success when Greg Capullo started doing the art, and people like Frank Miller were jumping on to do the script.
Yep.
So you kind of like, don't get me wrong, Todd McFarlane, great artist, Oh,
I'm not taking anything away from Todd. He's a fantastic.
If he's listening, by all means, drop me a line. Love to have you.
Yeah. Let me write some Spawn for you.
Yeah. Well,
I'll spend the whole time on some side character like Kincaid or whoever before he gets impaled on all the popsicle sticks and stuff.
Talking about Gail Simone, have you read the Domino book?
I have not. I did not read her Domino.
Check her Domino book out, because if you like the X kind of universe, I think from last year, there's basically. You could argue that it's Marvel's Birds of Prey. You've got Domino, you've got Diamondback, you've got some cowboy girl that I can't remember the name of, and they just pal around doing crazy things, and Domino's powers goes on the fritz, and there's a lot of banter. It's a lot of fun, and there's one particular issue where Domino goes to Shang-Chi, the master of Kung Fu, for some, and it's just pure flirt all the way through, and I'm like, if it is possibly last year one of the funnest books I ever read. So
I will definitely have to check that one out. I love her work. I love the stuff that she's been doing in the more indie market. Crosswind, for instance, is fantastic. Just her escape from I can never say it properly, Megatropolis, I believe.
Yeah.
That was just absolutely fantastic. I mean, she is a national treasure in my opinion.
Cool. She has a go at us Brits for how we make tea. We don't use microwaves at all. Just saying. I'll read your Twitter, Gail Simone. Don't you worry. All right, cool. Right, okay, so the time has come. It is time for your final end cap. Give us reasons why people should go out and check out Savage Bastards #1, please.
All right. Honestly, it's it's a new genre for Mad Cave, so that's the first reason. If you already like Mad Cave, you will have that same high quality that they put on all their books. It is a Western, but there is a twist to it. And if you want just a fun, exciting, sometimes emotionally devastating book, then this is the book for you.
There you go. From the chief cowpoke as we speak. Excellent. Okay, David, thank you so much for taking the time out of your really busy schedule to talk about your book. I will say now that the book is out on February 19th, wherever fantastically good comic books are sold. So if that's not your local comic book shop, maybe you should, get on there and tell them to pre-order the book. Mad Cave Studios are on there. I imagine it'll be on Comixology at the same time. Yep. So go and check it out on digital if you haven't got the room in your
pull
house in your pull box or in your house or wherever it is you store your comic books. I haven't told my wife that you can get them electronically because that she'd flip a nut because I've got too many already. So I'd leave that there. It's a 5-issue book. Go check it out. And thank you once again, David, for taking the time. All right, guys.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are more than welcome. Thank you very much. All right, guys, don't forget to check out UCPN for all your favorite shows, including Flipside Focus, The Definitive Crusade, and, of course, the No Price Podcast. This is your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes, saying adios, amigo.
Visit undercovercapes.com for the latest and greatest podcasts via the Undercover Capes Podcast Network. Also visit our parent company website, comiccrusaders.com, all about comic pop culture.